Good morning, sixth graders. Today we're going to be looking at how magma and sediment actually form. And our big questions today, we have three of them. How is magma formed? How is sediment formed? And how do different energy sources drive the transformation of rock? So that last part, you really need to think a lot about fifth grade science and how you talked about energy sources and energy transfer and apply that to our actual rock transformations that we're talking about now. So first, we want to look at our questions so far. Our question for chapter 1 was, how did the rock of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains form? And we had two possible claims. One, that they formed as one rock formation and then something separated them. Or two, that one rock formation formed before the other, and then the minerals from the older rock became part of the younger rock. So we know that sediment and magma make different types of rock, and we were able to actually figure out through our evidence, which we'll look at in a second, that claim 1 cannot be correct. Instead, we decided that claim 2 is probably more likely, that one rock formation formed before the other, and then minerals from the older rock became part of the younger rock. And the evidence we used to look at that were those evidence cards that we shared in last class. We had rock samples from the Great Plains and from the Rocky Mountains. We decided that this was the best type of evidence because we're getting a closer look at these rock samples and can observe them and take those observations to decide what type of rock they are. And we said that the rock from the Great Plains was sedimentary rock, and the rock from the Rocky Mountains is igneous rock, meaning that they did not form together, because if they formed together, they would be the same type of rock. And we know this because the type of rock a rock is depends on how it actually forms. So we look at these two places, and what we're basically going to try to figure out now is which one came first. And that's going to take us into our chapter question. Our chapter 2 question, because we are starting our second chapter today, is where did the magma and the sediment that formed the rock of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains come from? So we're trying to figure out where these things came from. And we have two possible claims now. The sediment that formed the Great Plains came from the rock of the Rocky Mountains, or the magma that formed the Rocky Mountains came from the rock of the Great Plains. So we want to figure out which one actually came first and then helped the other one form. Did it come from the Rocky Mountains and go to the Great Plains, or did the magma form in the Great Plains and then go to the Rocky Mountains? So we're going to figure that out through looking at a simulation. But first, we're going to actually look at some vocabulary that will be very useful today. Our very first one is energy, and this should sound pretty familiar from last year. But energy is the ability to make things move or change. So solar energy, like you see a cartoon there, is the type of energy or the form of energy that basically makes everything on Earth move or change. And then we also have several other forms of energy, but you can trace almost everything back to solar energy or energy from the sun. Another word that you should be much more familiar with is erosion or weathering, and then erosion. We'll do weathering first. Weathering is the process of rock breaking down into smaller pieces due to wind or moving water. So it could be water, could be wind, could also be ice, as you see in that cartoon there. And then you also have erosion, which is the movement of sediment from one place to another, often caused by wind or flowing water. So once again, weathering is the breaking and erosion is the movement. They usually go together because if water is breaking down a rock, it's also going to move that rock away. So in order to figure out our answer to our chapter question, the first thing we're going to do is actually look at a simulation. And when you go to your Amplify website, which I'll show you how to get to in a second, you are going to be looking at a simulation that looks a lot like this. So first, you're going to actually look at your table of what you're looking for. If you're going to do a lab or an experiment or a model, we want to know what we're actually looking for. In the first part, you're going to see this table in your Google form, and you'll answer the questions below as well. For sediment, we're looking at how did it form and where. And for magma, we're looking at, again, how did it form and where. So you can look at your actual simulation and tell me where in the simulation you see it and how it actually formed or what caused it to form. Now, when you do your simulation, you're going to get to a page like this. And if you click on the what I call a little hamburger here or a sandwich, those three lines that are stacked up, you'll want to make sure that you're in process mode and not energy mode. We will use energy mode today, but first we're going to use process mode. And you can use these buttons that I have pointed at, weather, melt, at surface, or below surface, and see what happens when you click on those buttons. If you click on one, you might see something highlighted in green. You will need to click on whatever is highlighted or has a line around it in green in order to make it actually happen. And you're trying to find out what causes sediments to form and what causes magma to form. Now, to add sediments, do not just click on the button that says add sediments, because you won't get an answer. You won't see anything happen except for sediments just flow in. And that is not what we want to do. That's kind of like the cheater way of adding sediments here. We want to see what process is actually going to cause sediments to form. All right. When you go to your model, what you're actually going to be doing is, I'm just getting ahead of myself, sorry, is going to a page that looks like this. If you were here last year, you're probably pretty familiar with using the Amplify website. I know you've used it for simulations before. Whether you were here last year or not, all you need to do when you click on the link for your simulation that's in your form is log in with Google. You will have three options, most likely one that says log in with Google, one that says log in with Clever, and one that says log in with Amplify. Choose the one that says log in with Google. You are already in My Amplify classrooms. Once you do that, you'll be able to be signed in and see this simulation right here. And that is all you need to do. So for part one, you're looking at how do sediments form and where. And part two, you're looking at how does magma form and where. You can go ahead and do that now, and I'll see you back here in the next section.